Hi everyone, good morning. Thank you so much for coming to our event today on gender-based approaches to CVE. At the Center for Global Policy, we are really excited and proud of the offerings that we have in terms of policy-based analysis. We're nonpartisan, non-ideological, we don't accept any foreign donations. All of the work that you see is fully homegrown expert policy analysis based on experience in the field and expertise from decades of studying the topics that you're going to hear about. So to start it off, I would like to introduce Dr. Aisha, one of our senior fellows. She is an affiliate at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. She has previously served as the Associate Director at Georgetown University's MA program in conflict resolution. She has also been a consultant for the Religion and Peace Building program at the United States Institute of Peace. On top of all of that, she is a founding member of the Salam Institute for Peace and Justice, a nonprofit organization for research, education, and practice on issues related to conflict resolution, nonviolence, and development. She primarily researches conflict resolution and peace building in the Muslim world, gender and peace building, countering violent extremism, which you will hear about today, interfaith dialogue, religion and peace building, and the evaluation and monitoring of peace building and development programs. We are very excited to have her with us today and also to have our guest, Dr. May. Aisha is going to introduce her in just a moment, and we will get started with the presentation. Please do take note of our question platform. If you have any questions throughout the event, feel free to go on mexi.com and use the code 310965 to ask them. I will be sure to ask the questions at the end of the presentation, and hopefully we will have a lively discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having this event here at the Center for Global Policy. I'm really excited to introduce my colleague, May Elemat. She's the co-founder of and the senior advisor for strategy and research at Al Hayat Center, which is based in Jordan. Since 2006, she has been working in the Middle East in the field of NGO management, social accountability, open government, citizen engagement, women's rights and participation, and countering violent extremism, using locally based approaches in involvement with local stakeholders and engagement of government officials and leading researchers and trainings in the field. She is also working as a consultant with the Jordanian government to lead the Open Government Unit at the Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation since 2018. She's also a member of the Expert Hub on Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financing of Terrorism since 2018. This hub involves representatives of non-profit organizations, advocates, independent experts from 16 countries working to combat restrictions on civic freedoms arising from Financial Action Task Force, recommendations countering terrorism, anti-money laundering, etc. Mrs. Elemat is also a member of the World Bank Group's Expert Advisory Council on Citizen Engagement, and she's just finished her master's degree in major program management at Said Business School at the University of Oxford. And she was awarded a women's scholarship. I'm really, really excited to hear her research and have this conversation with you. Thank you. Hello? Thank you. Is it working?
Yeah, it is working.
Great. Thank you for having me today. I'm very honored to be here with you, and thank you for coming from different background here to hear about gender-based approaches in countering violent extremism, or I call it preventing violent extremism, because what all we society organization is not countering. We're not going to security solutions. Today I'm going to present for you what we do in Jordan as a civil society organization in Al Hayat Center. I'm not going to present only findings of the research we do, but through mentioning some of the facts that we work on, I'll be presenting some of the research facts that we reached. So we start.
So just to give you, first of all, a background of my organization, we were established in 2006 and as a civil society organization, non-governmental, non-profit organization. Our main objective was into spreading accountability, governance, and participation, and also preserving a community cohesion perspective within our community. So, as you can see, we have mainly two programs in Al Hayat. We have accountability, governance, and participation, which is mainly related to election monitoring, parliament monitoring, and also government plans monitoring. Within this was actually the entry to our second program on community cohesion and preventing violent extremism. And I'm not going to explain too much about this program. I'm going to only show you the most interesting part of it on the next slide, which is the governance and participation. As you can see here in the photo, I'm not sure it's very clear from the light, but those are students of one of the schools in Jordan, and here my colleague is explaining to them about the participation in election and democracy in general, and how can they run, campaigns for themselves, which is the basic that we focus in Jordan. It is to how to increase the public participation and the communication between different sectors in Jordan, which in our opinion is gonna influence and improve the community cohesion and the tolerance in our community. Because as I will explain later on, now after ISIS and after all of these phenomena that we have witnessed through the past few years, now remains is the intolerance in our community, and the radicalization, the local-based radicalization, which we should be facing and we should be addressing in the next few years. The second program, which I will talk more about, is actually the community cohesion and PVE program. As you can see here from the photos, I brought to you, this is in Arabic, but you can see that it's talk about, terrorism and, how we can make campaigns and what's the target group that we can target into our local-based initiatives. Here you can see also some participants trying to do problem solving through the trainings. And here also is some of the peaceful demonstration to have more community cohesion in our communities. And this is all part of the programs that we are doing. In this program, we have different target groups. We have, for example, this is the research that we did, which influenced actually different programs of what we do. So here you can see we are, in our programs, we are tackling students, teachers and counselors, mother and youth. We have CPOs and CSOs within our target group, decision makers, and local community in general, in addition to the religious, let's say, dialogue or the religious leaders that they are with us. This research, which I did, was the first influencer into our long-term strategy, where we discovered that, first of all, women play a huge role into preventing violent extremism, whether as a decision maker or as a mother or as a religious leader, where we call them wa'ida. I don't know if you are familiar with this, the preacher, the women preacher. The second thing that we discovered is that our decision makers, they really, they don't do the right work because they're always afraid of the reaction of their local community and how they always want to satisfy them without really touching base into sensitive issues like religion. The third also thing that we learned is that our community tend to be very passive, so they don't really intervene into the process or try even to prevent, for example, the people in their communities to go into ISIS. And when I did this study, it was, the whole phenomena. It was very exciting time of ISIS and all the war in Iraq. And I remember one of the fascinating questions that I asked, and you can see from the answer that there is real problem into the process, is I asked the mothers, if you see your son or daughter getting radicalized, what are you gonna do? And I remember more than half of them, they wouldn't tell their husband about that. And you can see there is a real problem and gap in our community in the communication of the issue, especially from women, because they feel socially they are responsible for raising the kids and all of the consequences that comes with that. So here we notice a problem, and when we ask them if you are going to take any action, if the peer of your son or daughter will change, will, for example, get radicalized, and they seem to be passive. They will not interact. And the reason for that is they don't want to have any social problems or being accused from, the local community that they are trying to destroy the reputation, for example, of a family. So you can see there is a lot of gaps in our community. And women in leadership positions, I interviewed them, they also didn't have a real role into that. There was a very fascinating results from this study. You can all Google it and you will find the study. This actually influenced us to see who are the target group that we should be working with. So as you can see in here, those are all the production of the study, because we thought, okay, we should work with mothers, but also with youth, and with mothers and youth together. And I will, show you our recent project. I took only one example from our project to talk about, but then I will talk about our methodology and, ways of work or approaches that we use. We also found that, for example, teachers and counselors, the teachers are more in direct contact every day through the school with the kids. However, they really don't have the time or the profession to deal with any attempt of radicalization or any, misbehavior that you can sense that there is a radicalization. However, the counselors on the other side, they don't sit with the student every day, and they only deal with issues like, if the student have violence against each other and all of this. So we thought, how can we combine the teachers and counselors' roles into the school and, empower them and equip them with the skills and communication among them if they perceive any, let's say, behavior that could have some signs for radicalization, how can they deal with it? And we managed that. This is one of our interesting projects that just finished last month. We managed that. Into the CPOs and CSOs, we felt always there is a problem with, working on the local level. In Jordan, working in PVE or CVE became a business, actually. There is a lot of European, American organization, even Jordanian organization, who start to take this as a business, and they start to do training, communication, especially in the refugee communities, which is really a problem, because in this case, we are not really empowering the local actors to sustain the efforts that we are doing. The problem is they come with an approach, they finish, and then they leave. But they don't build the capacity of the CPOs, who became a local partner, but a local partner to do, let's say, logistics. Or, okay, I want this target group, this place, can you help me into doing that? So we feel this is not the role that the CPOs should play, the community-based organization. That's why we worked through the past 3 years with more than, I think, 50 or more organizations as a core group, not as even more beneficiaries, but as a core group to build their capacities. And when I say building their capacities, not only on the topic, but on the ethical standard, working in this topic, on financial management and administrative management, monitoring and evaluation, and all of these things. With decision makers, we try to work with the Ministry of Education, with the Ministry of Youth, into engaging them more on the process. And of course, local community are the wider beneficiaries. Maybe when I talk more also now about the approaches, you will see how we work that. So, yes. So here, just, I hate to do this slide because I hate numbers only to show that we are doing something, but it's at least for you to get an indication. But we really, in our organization, focus more on the quality of the work. So we take care of each number of those people, that they are really having the adequate, information and knowledge and ethical standards to work in this arena. So you can see teachers, we targeted almost 1,000, religious leaders, 2,000, religious leaders are the women men preachers in specific. CBOs, CSOs, 100. And then parents and students around 3,000. Youth and activists and local community are 15,000. Because, as I will explain now in the next slide, when we work, actually, what we do is this cycle or this, let's say, model, we apply it in our different programs, regardless of the target group. So first of all, we do capacity building. Whatever, this is just, as I explained, is an example of a recent project that we are doing, which is funded by the State Department, but we are doing this model for all the projects. So for example, this project we do 22 members from the Ministry of Education, then the Ministry of Youth, and then SOS, and then Youth and Mothers Community. We have different, target group. We ask or we equip them into different capacity building activities, into how they can do communication, community outreach, how they manage a project and programs, how they can do initiative design, and then communicate with their communities. And then we also equip them on the topic itself, the PVE, and the working methodologies, working solutions in the local community. After they get this experience, they all exposed to what we call it peer education. We found this method, the peer education, is very fascinating because in a limited time, a limited resources, you are really tackling and targeting a wider group of the community. And when in peer education, we use two methods actually. We use the method especially for male because the sensitivity of our community, where they can gather their peer in different places, and then they can really share the knowledge they get with them. And with women, especially, we're not talking about very young women. We are talking about women in household, as a household or in houses. We do what we call it a kitchen meeting or a cup of coffee, where the women, after they gain all of this experience, they gather their neighbors, their friends, whatever, and in their houses, and they start to talk about the topic, discuss the topic. So instead of talking gossips, they are talking PVE, or they are talking politics. And we use this in different programs and things. So, and we found that this really overcome any social or economic constraints for the women to participate, because it's very easy for the woman to tell her husband that I'm going to drink a cup of coffee in my neighbor house, comparing to saying I'm going to attend a session where all of the questions, and she don't have to be dressed, she didn't have to move between places, she just the next door. So we use this approach since 2008, and we got actually an award from the Austrian Foreign Ministry for Europe 3 years back on this approach as a very pioneer, that you can engage more people in a very limited resources, cost-effective approaches. After they do the peer education, and you can see here, just to give you a hint, I put here the target group, but I put how the amount of people that we target, how much it's really increasing. Like here we aimed at, for example, let's say 175, we have 113% extra. And you can see from these numbers that really people are interested in such programs, and they really, you really have more results than even what you expected. The third component that we do is initiative design. So all of the participants at the last training, they are trained on how to design an initiative, local-based initiatives, and how can you implement this initiative, how you can do community outreach and all of this. And they really do designs of initiatives while they are there in groups, and they start doing these initiatives, as I said here, initiative implementation, where they go and start implementing these initiatives. And it's an amazing, actually, space for them to have creative and innovative solutions on the local level, especially that they are very familiar with these communities. They came from these communities. And this is our philosophy into, you have to engage CPOs. They know what the community needs exactly. So they do the implementation of these communities. And as you can see, the target is always increasing, and which we love a lot about their, motivation and passion to the process. Now, very quickly, I'll show you the type of activities. You can see here, this is the program that we are currently working on at the end of it, actually, because now we reach to the initiatives. You can see here, for example, this is one of the initiatives that we did it with, workers at the Amman, Great Amman municipality, which is, the people who are there, the normal workers. Because, for example, this target group have been never engaged in any activities. This is the problem of our, the programs in Jordan. They see, okay, youth in university, and they keep doing youth in universities activities. So what we are trying is to actually, think out of the box and see who are the people who could be at risk, but they are not engaged. And here you can see even the type of activities that we are doing. So we engage youth with the workers at the municipality for them to play. It's an open day, have fun, but also have knowledge in a very nice and easy way. This is, for example, is also one of the activities as the SOS, if you are familiar with this. So also this faction, for example, SOS. What is here? I forget the orphans, or it's I forget the name of the organization, but it's actually basically the orphans who have no houses, or they don't sometimes recognize the parents, so they bring them into these villages where they receive education, and they live a group of youth in one houses with a mother. It's not the real mother, but they assign a mother for them. So this is well known in Jordan, for example. And for example, those groups, they never been tackled, and no one come and ask them, although they are the dangerous, because after 18, they are released to the community. Our system, of course, it has some problems. So after 18, they cannot stay in the house because other youth will come, to join them. So that's why, for example, this is one of the, group that we are tackling. And also, you can see some photos. They are, playing or working together. So, just to explain to you what we do, the framework of our project. So we learn, we practice. We learn through the capacity building, we practice through, the peer education, we innovate through the designs of and implementation of the initiatives. And then we sustain those through the community-based organization and the CPOs, networks that we create at the local level. If you see, it's the same what I explained. So it's so we do networking, and this is how we use this approach and method in all of our programs. So the work and methodology, I'm gonna talk about it very quick. So in our work, we always map the stakeholders and their needs through deep analysis. So we don't really invent the programs without consultation with the local community. We integrate their needs and data into the broader strategy of our organization and project. So we always, try to integrate what they need. And then we do due diligence through learning from stakeholders' feedback. Always we listen to their feedback through our, monitoring and evaluation, and we pursue changes always to our program. So you can see this very easily. This is a photo of actually of one of our programs. It's not a PVE pure program. It's about, a youth dialogue under the Jordan We Want. So we went to the governorates all over Jordan, and this is one of the sessions where we gather those youth, and we use this group work, so each group, smaller group, they do discussion and analysis into what is the Jordan we want. So part of it is discussing PVE into, what's the effort now to prevent violent extremism, how you see that, what you want more. And there was a very interesting, results out of this. So, and then we hold also openness and trustful, accountable communication with our stakeholders, and we try to give voice for all. So we are not only, trying to engage one part of the community. This is also one of the activities in the school. We try to focus on the mindset. So it's not only that we do this just because we want to do this. It's about, we believe in the importance of doing this. So stakeholder engagement is in the mindset of our people from the junior level until the senior level of the organization. And then we try to integrate always the best practice. This is part of our election monitoring program. We always integrate, best practices. We share experiences, but also we learn from others and apply it in our projects. But we customize it to the local needs, of course. We ensure strong M&E process as well. We share personal stories and turning points. We focus all the time to, at the beginning of each training, into seeing how this training or activity have influenced our participants. So they always share turning points, and it's very interesting to listen how we really influence people and change their attitudes and behaviors, because this is what we are looking for. We also focus into gender and cultural inclusion and sensitivity. This is part of our program. This is part of our religious leader program, where we have imams and wa'idat, women and men preachers, going together into training. This is also part of our discussion with Muslims and Christians, and part of our trainings as well, and communication. We engage donors and government in the project design and implementation. So we don't try to impose any idea unless there is buy-in from different stakeholders, because this is how we guarantee they are with us in the idea. Of course, we negotiate and we try to convince and we try to discuss and dialogue with them, but at the end of the day, we try to influence the policy level change, because we believe it's not only adequate or important to do programs on the ground or the grassroots. You also need to engage decision makers and influence the policy level in the process. We engage, as I say, the policy level in the project, and here you can see. Finally, I have always a question in the mind, which is the sustainability of the solution or the sustainability of our organization. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations have forgetting that, and they always after, and this is what we were discussing in the way, always after, the sustainability of their organization, forgetting that if your solution are sustainable, you are not needed anymore, which is great. We should all, as a civil society and NGOs, think about it from this perspective. You can see here different photos. I think I'm done. Yes. Thank you for listening, and I'm open to any question.
If you guys have any questions about Meg's presentation, please go to menti.com and use the code 310965 to ask them, and we will go over all of them at the end.
Thank you, Mai. That was amazing. And so what I'm going to be talking about is my most current research, which is inspired by many Muslim women peace builders that I've been working with, like Mai. And so what I'm really doing is, to go to the next slide, looking at the gender dynamics of violent extremism. And so this research was inspired by so many of my colleagues that have been working on the ground. And I started going into the field of conflict resolution, peace building, religion in the Middle East. And most of the time with Salamis and others, I was the only woman. And I was thinking I could not be the only Muslim woman working on these fields. And so I started and shifted to look for allies in the field. And with USIP and other organizations, I work a lot with Muslim women, building their capacity, doing trainings on various different aspects of peace building, violent extremism. So one of the things that I've observed, we can go to the next one. I'm going to try to go faster so we can have more time for questions. So the CVE is a very contested word. I don't really like to use it, countering violent extremism, because I come from the conflict resolution and peace building. I tend to see it from that lens. So many of these women, but many of these interventions are really responding to extreme violence in their communities using conflict resolution and peace building tools. But I made my peace with the term for the time being. And one of the important aspects of the CVE is that there's a more emphasis on community approaches as opposed to countering terrorism approaches. And traditionally, we focused on push factors, pull factors, trying to understand what drives people to be part of these things. We focused on a lot of the projects with training religious leaders to respond to violent extremism, assuming that religious leaders, because of religiously motivated conflict, usually or violence, religious leaders have power to influence and develop counter narratives. We worked on countering violent extremism through developing countering narratives online, etc. This has been the most strategies. But increasingly, we are recognizing that without understanding the gender dynamics and the role of women play in these extremist violence, we cannot really tackle this issue. So this was recognized by the United Nations. I'm not going to read you all the resolutions, but these were recognized by United Nations and etc. How do we address this? Women are now seen as an important element. So we go and start thinking about policy organizations, governments are now thinking, how can we more effectively include gender? So Women, Peace and Security community has been leading the field, have been trying to push forward a lot of this agenda. But and they've been doing amazing work, but one of the shortcomings of this agenda was that they focus mostly on secular, westernized women's organizations. And they sort of, and many of the research in the field either focus on women as violent extremists, fighting, supporting extremism, victims, or solution to violent extremism as the bullet points, but there's always this assumption, especially about Muslim women, that if we just go and train them, and if we could just go and empower them, we'll find the solution. And we from the West go and bring our knowledge and rescue. There's always this assumption, there's always this stereotyping implicit even in the best of approaches, that there's Muslim women are singular, unified groups. So I wanted to sort of bring the Muslim women's voice. And the reason I think what is so important to bring them into the conversation is that they have unique strengths that are not available to secular women's organizations. Because if we're tackling with religiously motivated violent extremism, and I look at Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS in particular, you have to engage the religious narrative at some point. And the people who are working with these groups have to be credible and legitimate. So religious leaders that tend to be male, they're not always necessarily the right people. I could tell a couple of different stories why some of these, we think these religious leaders, they may not have the legitimacy, they may not have the perspective sometimes, but they also do not address some of the unique problems of gender and violent extremism, such as gender-based violence, reintegration of female combatants, what do we do with the children, how do we address and reach out to young people? So women, especially women of faith, have unique strengths. So this is not the only solution, but this is an important voice that we have to also hear from. So what I look at in this research is how is this gender and religious identities, the intersection of these two identities, impact women's different experiences with violent extremism, and how can Muslim women respond to these? What are the unique strengths they have, and how do they do it? So I have this comparative study that I'm looking at different cases from Pakistan, Nigeria, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, etc. And so one thing that I look at, for example, is when women are being targeted, either directly or indirectly by these organizations, there's always this gender and identity elements. For example, the different kinds of punishment and violence against Muslim women and non-Muslim women. There's also violence against Muslim men and non-Muslim men. There's always this gender element. Then I look at the supporters or fighters of these organizations. What draws them here? And the findings are really, really interesting. I will briefly mention that later. And how are women, in what ways can they respond to these unique challenges? So, I mean, I could skip. This is, we heard about Nadia and some other Chippewa girls, etc. These are some different experiences. we heard one of the really interesting statistics is that in ISIS, almost 20% of foreign fighters are women coming from Western societies. In Boko Haram, 72% of suicide bombers whose gender was identifiable were women. And not always they're like victims of like forced into this. Some of them are willingly joining and doing this. But these are not the only roles that women play. They play as supporters. I mean, there's a group of women that Nusrat Kadim, one of the peace builders that I work with, was talking about. They were stitching suicide bombers for their sons. And that sounds really bizarre, but why are they doing? What is motivating them, etc. So one of the very interesting things that I found going through the recruitment material or the material from Daesh or ISIS and others is that they have a very gender-sensitive recruitment strategy, targeting men and women. And they're so sensitive to, for example, how they target Western women. The messaging is very different. And women from Muslim majority context. These are there's a magazine called Dabuk by, it's an English magazine by ISIS. And you could see there's always a section about women, for women, written by women. And this is one of the first ones that focus this. And they also have a Hansa Brigade, female brigade, and Hansa manifestation. This is talking about the near extinction of Western women because the women are not fulfilling their fitra, original constitution. So here the gender conception of the narrative of ISIS becomes very interesting. And there's another section that written by a woman legitimizing enslavement of women. And there's also another message. I don't know if you can see the little kitten with the mujahideen, the fighter. So there's like really sensitive. I mean, I do want to. They're brutal images as well. But this is a quote from the Hansa Brigade's manifesto in the Dabuk magazine. So and how is this impacting women's experiences? So one of the things that I look at, why women in particular join. So women and men have similar push and pull factors to some extent, but there's some unique elements for women that are different than men's. They tend to have this, similar to males, they have a sense of the Muslim community is under attack. There's an increase in how do we do justice in this world. There's a social, cultural marginalization. For example, Muslim women in the Western societies, especially who choose to wear hijab, are particularly targeted or sort of experiences harassment, especially young kids. My daughter is in high school. The high school pressures of social belonging, etc., is brutal. And if you're not allowed to participate in social activities, etc., if they don't understand you, there's a sense of alienation that is felt differently by girls than boys sometimes. And there's different dynamics, but there's a similarity there. Also, there's this internalization of these gender and patriarchal stereotypes and norms. That's really, I go into deep analysis of that. So these are some of the push factors, that sort of the structural factors. Then the sense of the pull factor is what motivates them individually. Some believe that jihad is a duty, and there's Islamic groups. Their definition of jihad for women and women's role in jihad is evolving. And so there's a sense of adventure for many. This is particularly used towards recruiting Western, sense of adventure, sense of love, a sense of this romanticization of this experience. Belonging through a sisterhood, which is responding to marginalization, is very important. If you look at the messages of these girls, what they're looking for is that sense of community being understood. But very interestingly, both Western and women from the Muslim context feel a sense of empowerment, which sounds very contradictory. But for Muslim women who feel oppressed in their community in some way, make a choice to join this group, usually on their own, sometimes with their boyfriends, husbands are involved. But still, one of the really interesting phenomena that happens is that this idea that, for example, if you're a Muslim woman, supporter of ISIS, who has a son, it's called the Cubs, and whose husband is martyred, you are higher in the highest hierarchy. You have power over other men. There's respect, there's community, reverence towards you, and you are elevated. So there's this really interesting gender dynamics, and gender is not just your gender, it's different elements of, your race, ethnicity, your social status in terms of mother, kid, age, etc. So, so there's this sense of empowerment, which seems to contradict our Western notions of empowerment in many ways. So so in addition, and there's also different reasons why these organizations include women and change their gender narratives, but I'm not going to talk about that. But I do want to spend a little bit of time on talking about some of the Muslim women from diverse contexts, so what they've been doing and in what areas they've been more successful. It's not a complete research, it's an ongoing research. I'm still gathering more information. My dream is to have an event where I bring all these Muslim women peacemakers together to reflect together on what's working on. And but one of the things that, this is my friend Musara Fatima, is from Iraq, and she is Hamsatu from Nigeria, and I just put the three of their images here. But one of the things, as I said earlier, is that what is one of the unique strengths of these groups, the next slide please, is first of all, they have unique strengths that are not available to secular women. For example, they can engage the radicalization of women, young girls, reintegration of them into societies, taking care of the children, understanding their unique needs that may not be always available to males, but also engaging through theological narratives to convince. It's not the only reason, but it is an important element of it, and their religious identity and their role as mothers, sisters can really have an impact. So they also, many of them do unique training methods. For example, Sarat, I'm going to her again, I have done this project focusing on training of mothers, engaging those mothers who are doing suicide bombing shirts, or engaging women, young girls who may be radicalized, or the radicalization of those who have been radicalized. They also have other unique strengths, like addressing and caring, in particular for gender-based violence. So it's not easy for its conservative societies to talk about these issues, especially with male leaders. They may not even think about asking, but they're in a better place to provide social and psychological support to the victims. They are also, because of their social role, they sometimes have better ability to understand if their kids are being radicalized. They, for example, a couple of the women that I talk about, they have been involved in this work because their sons, one of Hamsatu's son was being radicalized, and she starts hearing or seeing this, and then starts going to the event that he is going and finding. Fatima, her son, joined organization, and she actually went through all the to find her son in the camps, and her mother and gender identity was something that protected her because there was more reverence to that, and because she would. I also talk about some of the unique elements. One of them is strategic invisibility. This what may see as this empowerment can be a source of empowerment for many women. For example, her non-threatening role as a mother, as a woman, made it more easy for her to access those groups. And one of the other things that she saw when she went to get her son, she also saw the extremists, the fighters, as victims. And then she realized other children are children of other mothers. So how can we sort of approach this issue from a way that would disengage them? And she also uses religious narratives and convinces them, and work with the religious leaders as well. So that's another strength. Can we go to the next slide, please? So some of the strengths that they have is that their religion is a source of strength and source of credibility and legitimacy. They also, one of the things that they do is, like I was talking about, they know their communities better. They have a sense of, it's like a compass. And they contextualize their intervention strategies or approaches according to their unique needs. So it's not like a cookie cutter model. Their strategic invisibility, their non-threatening stance as roles of mothers, sisters, etc., provides them with unique source of power. They also tend to focus on relationship building. There's more caring in a way that is sort of like they tend to build upon this. So, and they also engage religious leaders because of this is not available for mostly secular women. For example, they work effectively with Hamsa to develop the radicalization conflict resolution program on radio, and using the Quran and Sunnah and other sources, work with religious leaders to develop a training program. So these are some of the strengths and unique opportunities available to them, but we have to hear them, we have to learn from them. So as I said, my dream is to look at what is working, what can we learn, how can we carry this forward. And the other challenge that they have is that they're very lonely often. They're sort of in these, and how can we provide a network or space for them to learn from each other, work with each other, support each other, and how we should definitely incorporate them into our conversation on how to respond to extremism and violence. So this is a quote from Musarat. She says, "You need to work with women as well. We have to project the positive roles women are playing. Women's role is not just a mother, but also an activist, a teacher, a religious scholar, a political leader, a decision maker, and a peace negotiator." So we have to include them in our conversation. Thank you.
Right, so we've got a few questions from our audience. And if you guys think of any more during the course of this conversation, feel free to either enter them on Menti or raise your hand, and we can have a little bit of a dialogue now. So one question is, why haven't women been studied as actors in this field previously? What has changed to bring them into the dialogue now?
I think maybe, Aisha, you can, because we worked with the mother fighters, but I remember one of the interesting books that I was telling you about is one of two Jordanians made it. It's about highlighting the key role for the women into the ISIS groups and how they were leaders actually in the work of ISIS. And this is a new point of view that shifted the beliefs from women as victims into women as actors. I think maybe because we were familiarized with a lot of actions that women have done in this field, and also because as Aisha mentioned, it's sometimes she would encourage even her son, and it's very difficult even to encourage a son to go and die. So, and what it's the new research that observes their leadership role. Now, I read the book, and one of the things that they talk about or highlighted is that because the women, they didn't find a space for leadership in their normal communities, especially there were a lot of cases from Saudi Arabia, for example, and they were having PhDs, women with PhDs, and very educated, and they turned to be leaders within ISIS community because they didn't have the space and the leadership role in their normal community, so that when they went to ISIS, they felt they can really actively practice this law. This is my point of view, but not as someone who worked with returners or something. So,
I mean, there was some work on women and peace, but that's a different literature. We I went to a couple of events with the violent extremism, and people would ask, so why is no one looking at women and violent extremism? I just told them, like, there's a lot has been actually done, but you're just not aware of it because I think that we, from a research point of view, we're very siloed as well. Security people, international relations people, peace building people, anthropologists, we don't talk to each other either. So we don't know what's happening. We don't build on each other's work. We use different terminologies sometimes. But that's on one level. But so there's been some research on looking into role of women and how we can understand that. But there's all the studies were not as nuanced. For one thing, because women have been assumed to be passive victims usually. So looking at the role that they played was invisible. So one group was asked in another event, were asked, what about women, what are they doing? They said, there's nothing being done. I'm like, there is so much being done just because you don't know. There was not less of an interest, less of awareness from a research community what was happening. I think the Women, Peace and Security did some of the most groundbreaking work in order to sort of bring this issue at the forefront of security studies, CVE studies as well. But as I said, looking at the role of faith and women of faith is that we have a lot of secular bias in our communities as well. Here, we don't, like I know a lot of people who think, especially if you cover your hair, you cannot be smart enough because you're covering your hair. Because it's like I'm from Turkey too. There's this huge division in Turkey or in some communities, especially in political science field. There's a lot of, like if you work if you don't look at religion, but look from within a religious tradition, there is this sort of like, it's not scientific enough. So there was this a lot of lack of interest, lack of knowledge in some cases. But I know a lot of people are focusing on religious women and peace building at USIP and other places that needs to be brought to the conversation.
Can I add something, perhaps? This reminds me of an interesting story that we faced in our one of our programs when we trained the imams and waidat, the women and men preachers. And it was the first time for them to be in the same space. So we struggled at the first and second training into not even sitting with each other at the same table because, halal and haram and, we're not supposed to sit with each other. And on the fourth training, we find that one of the things that, we start asking, what have been changed with you? And most of the men, they were saying that we didn't thought that women preachers, they have this capacity. We didn't thought that they are really influencers. So you can feel that the stereotype, they already got, even as a preachers, that women and men preachers, the men preachers, so the women preachers have no role. They don't really influence the community. They will not do anything. So they were like, they like discovering something new that, we thought, no, they know how to talk. And this was like, they know how to talk. They know how to present. They know. So it's really about, stereotypes based on our social context as well, I think.
Just to add, like in one of the trainings that I did between Iraqi women, we brought secular and religious women from different faith groups. The biggest division was among the secular and religious communities. One secular woman would not refuse, she would refuse to talk to anyone who came from a religious perspective. There was like really strong reaction. So it evolved and they became good friends and all of that. But there was a lot of division in that and looking down upon each other, both mutual.
Can I ask about this? Yes, of course. I mean, this whole dichotomy of religious secular women, I'm not sure how straightforward this is in our context, like in Jordan, because there are so many secular women who are still religious. They just practice their religion differently, and they are actually not necessarily having a hijab.
Yeah.
So also the other level of complexity around this is that a lot of the funders, some of them represented here, they hire women who are quote unquote secular to work with religious women, but they're not willing to hire religious women working, and I'm maybe generalizing, but there's also the funding piece impacting who do we hire from the World Bank or whatever versus who's doing the work in the field.
Yeah, and I agree with you that it's not clear cut. Secular doesn't mean that you're not religious. But it has been articulated in such a way in these communities, and it's mutually reinforced. I mean, there are a lot of people who are religious, but they believe in secularism. Mm-hmm. But there's still this division that has been a big challenge in my work, and this is between women issues, mm-hmm. let alone male-female issue.
And can I also here add, it's funny thing that, even, for example, in Jordan, there is a lot of champions who work into tolerance and everything, but they cannot accept women with hijab. And this is always, really, make me angry and make me just tell them straight to the point. Why you are criticizing, for example, this lady, and you don't accept she criticize you, especially as ladies, we are not covered, for example. And what I notice is that, sometimes we talk, we just, chat, and then someone pass with hijab or niqab or whatever, and she say, "Oh my gosh, how they wear this," and I say, "But you are calling for, liberation. You are calling for tolerance. How could you, not accept that?" So I think there is also something wrong with our personality and how we can accept, and what does tolerance means anyway. Is it, you only believe that you are tolerant but you cannot tolerate other people, whatever is the situation. So this is also part of a lot of workers in this field. And the second thing is, for what Dr. Ilham said, is that I believe one of the key mistakes international organizations or donors do is that, one size fit for all, which is they bring, whether with people, they bring people and they think that they will work and they will make reform, they will make, change, whatever, in their community, which they don't do, even if they are in paper having great reports, but in fact, there is no impact. Or they do programs, they do it with a program. So they bring a program and they think this program, for example, would work in Jordan. And then you discover after that this program is not working in Jordan. And this is one of the key mistakes that really spend a lot of resources without real impact on the field. So that's why, for example, as I said, we believe in the CBOs, because the CBOs, they speak the language. They can sustain the solution that they are doing. But if I am an organization or a person who doesn't speak the language, I will not succeed. One of the key points on success in our organization as Hayat is our people, the staff, they come from grassroots. So they speak the language. They know, they know that this, for example, faction of community is not allowed. They know, for example, that a woman, if I want a woman to participate, I should accept that she will bring her husband with her to sleep at the hotel, which some of the donors, they don't accept, the regulations, and we always tell them, if I didn't allow, she will not come to attend. So how come I'm doing this discrimination just because she has a social background or whatever circumstances that prevent her to come? So this is one of the small details, but it really makes a difference into targeting the right people, that organization and people and donors, whatever, they should pay attention to.
So there's a specific question on Jordan that I believe is addressed to you, Mike. Any thoughts on Jordan's excellent initiative on CVE titled the Amman Message? It appears neither government nor NGOs are referring to it anymore. Was it effective or has it lost steam?
Okay, so see, I'm one of the, I always criticize the policy level, intervention in Jordan. So we have a problem in Jordan that we have a strategy that didn't came into the light, that, they spend a lot of money on, and they really made a lot of efforts, regardless of my comments on their methodology. But they spend a lot of efforts and money and resources. But unfortunately, it's still in the drawers of the decision makers. They didn't publish it. They didn't, announce anything relating to it. And I think Jordan government is in denial of the whole thing of PVE. They are not, even with civil society, they are allowed to do trainings like this, call it community cohesion, not even PVE and all of this, but they are not allowed to, for example, work with rehabilitation programs or prisoners, or, it's such a sensitive programs, let's say. We don't have any access to information about, the returners or anything related to Jordanians in ISIS. So we have a lot of problems in terms of disclosing information and getting data, real data that we can build our programs on. We build our programs into programs that prevent only. None of the Jordanian civil society organization, they work on countering that or rehabilitation programs. Strategy, I think there should be a change on the policy level, but I don't know about the government. They still didn't do anything, and it's not coming in the priority of the government. The economic situation, political situation is demonstrating the whole, atmosphere of Jordan. And I remember not last year, the year before, we monitor the parliament. So we, from time to time, we do small studies on the parliamentarians. And when we discussed the budget, we analyzed the budget discussions in the parliament. I think the preventing PVE or CVE, any discussion related to this were only by 3% comparing to other subjects. So you can see if the parliamentarians are not taking this, and this, by the way, it was right after, I don't know if you are familiar with the pilot story.
Yes.
Yeah, the pilot story of Jordan. It was, yes, exactly. It was just like 1 month after that. So you can see that still we are in the enthusiasm into solving the problem, or at least highlighting the problem, and you can see that legislators, they didn't tackle the whole thing. The prime minister, for example, he formed a committee from some of the ministers to tackle this, but they didn't have a single one meeting on this issue. So you have an idea.
If I can I have a follow-up question on the Amman message? It was a good question. I don't know who sent it. Not to defend necessarily, but don't you think, that was 2004 when they came up, they have a website. I'm partly saying I must acknowledge because I teach it as a CVE model to my students. And the reason was that when it came in 2004, it was the first effort which upfront said we are against takfir. And they got the Shias, the Sunnis, the Sufis, even the Salafis. I can't think of any other major international effort or effort from any Muslim country which brought all the sects together. So in that sense, it was a great move. But you're right, and this is so important. I'm so thankful for your candidness that it is now clear that, and this I'm hearing, but you have said it very clearly that the government has not invested in its implementation. Was it internal issues? Was it regional politics? And any more thoughts on it? Or do you think still, because when I go to Jordan or elsewhere, they still have that beautiful published report, which is they've spent a lot of money, and they have excellent website. But that's why I think it should, if the idea will go away, it will be a bad sign. Somehow, can it be resurrected, even as a big idea, and the smaller things can be done by other groups?
Okay, so you are forcing me to say no.
Be careful, you're going back to
No. The good thing about Jordan is you can say what you want. So I think Amman message, I don't underestimate the efforts and the beautiful idea of Amman message. I'm not tackling that. I'm tackling is what after Amman message. Like Amman message is the soft way of dealing things and promoting, the image, and it was great. But now after ISIS and all the influence that brought to people, you need now more sharper or more, let's say, hard solution. You need really to have a strategy. You need to see how you can interact, and you need to make a multi-dimensional strategy, like a strategy to work on the returners, for example, and the families of the returners, a strategy to work on to preventing and disseminating tolerance again, because now Jordan is polarized, and now Jordan is having a very difficult situation. ISIS is done, but the ISIS ideas and the intolerance, it's not going anywhere, and it's even become worse. You can see the discussions on social media. It's very, people are not accepting anything. They only feel that their right is the right, let's say, the right opinion. So after that, the problem, where is the problem? I think it's, as I say, denial and not seeing it as a priority. I think those are the main two things that really prevent our government to interfere. And I think also because, there is a huge money they came into the country to invest in the refugees and on the whole things. They feel that, civil society, international donors, they are controlling the situation. But the problem is even the one who drafted the strategy, there was two strategies. The strategy that, the State Department announced and made this huge scandal for Jordan because no one knew at that time there was a strategy, and it was only narrative. But the second strategy that I'm talking about, which they spent around 1 year to come up with this strategy. I had the opportunity to look at the strategy like the Liberal government. And it was powerful because, in my opinion, suggesting a platform to put the civil society and international donors projects and efforts only to just coordinate among them is not a PPE or a CVE strategy. Because this literally the strategy was only coming up with this. For them, the whole solution to the process is just to putting this platform, and it was moreover research, that replicate what other researchers has said about the drivers, economic situation, blah blah blah. It was a research, and even with this piece of research, which they redid it again, it didn't even come to the light. It wasn't published. It wasn't worked with. There was a whole, let's say, closed door, I can call it, about the whole phenomenon. Why is that? The only explanation I have is that it's not a priority for Jordan, but the government, I think, they suffer now from the lack of trust of people and even the lack of tolerance among people themselves. Whatever the government is doing now in Jordan, people are not satisfied. And I think, in my opinion, this is a result of the whole situation and the whole lack of communication.
Great. So we've got another question. How does the approach in countering radicalization differ when addressing women in the West? Where do you see more need in Western cultures?
So I think when we're talking about the West, we also have to distinguish like, for example, the number of females from the US is one of the lowest, but the largest number are from Belgium as well as France. I think understanding what are some of the source of alienation, marginalization, what are some of the problems in each unique context. So it cannot be one general strategy that fits all, but like Holland, they have different issues than the US. I think in terms of these issues, US has done a better job than European countries, in particular England, France, Belgium, Holland. They have more serious problems. So we have to understand what are the unique problems in each context. What are some of the sort of attractions for these girls to join, and what resources do they have to do that? I think this has to be a multi-level strategy, not only messaging, not only understanding the root causes, what drives them, but also collaborating with other governments in the region to address these issues together. I think we didn't do enough. I think bigger than those who are joining, I think our bigger problem is going to be what do we do with the reintegration and rehabilitation. I think there are so many issues that we have to tackle, because what happens there, how we perform there, is going to influence future recruitment, future problems. It's going to, if we don't start thinking about this and how to effectively address this issue, it's going to be a bigger problem in the future. So I think that's the urgency, what we do.
And then there's a question about there's a lot of attention on the role of motherhood, but what about fathers? They're also parents and presumably have a significant influence on their children's lives. So is that being addressed in any work that you've seen?
Did you have any?
I have. Okay. So I think it's related to how important is, the father's role in the family. It is very important. Everyone knows that. It just, I think one of the, factors is the availability of the fathers to the programs, because usually the fathers, they work, outside, especially in our community, in, the typical community of the men role and versus women role, for example. So we thought about this definitely when we analyze our stakeholders, and actually it was advised by some stakeholders that we should engage the fathers. That's why we engage them, but not on the, let's say, the first level of capacity building, but they are engaged through the initiative designs. This is one directions, but through the different programs like Women's and Men Preachers, because at the end of the day, they are fathers. And for example, counselors and teachers also, we engage them. And I think they have a great role. It just sometimes, it's the level of access to them again. In my research, I remember that you can feel that the mother's influence in the ideology, as per the student I interviewed, it was more comparing to the father. I think because she spends more time with them, she talks with them, but we need to work into the integration between the two roles. This is for sure, to make sure that they are at least open in the communication of their kids. Because as I told you in my study also, the women, they wouldn't tell even the husband if their kids get radicalized. You can see there's a gap of communication and responsibility sharing.
There's some research, not direct on this, but there's some research on toxic masculinity and thwarted masculinities that focus more on how gender norms, masculine gender norms, make young boys more vulnerable to joining these groups. Social expectation of power, status, among other things, access to resources, how it's related to that, and how lack of some of those resources like jobs, opportunities, can make boys join more these groups to compensate for that. There are also some research on changing conceptions of masculinity in the domestic violence area, better fatherhood models, better husband, like how do you, the gender dynamics. But I have not seen any particular research that focuses on the role of fathers within the context of CVE, which I think is important, but I think the cultural dynamics that are also need to be taken into consideration. And so I think that would be fascinating.
So I've got two more questions, and let's try and do this quickly because we're already a little over time. So thank you all for sticking around for this. But yes, let's go through this quickly. So what can multilateral organizations and international NGOs do to better coordinate sustainable solutions with CVOs?
Is that one question?
Yes, that's one.
Do you want to put them both?
Okay, yes. And then the other one is what strategies, in your opinion, can be cross-applied to other areas dealing with violent extremist growth? One example being the Balkans.
Can you say the second question, Jane?
Yeah, that's the second one. What strategies, in your opinion, can be cross-applied to other areas dealing with violent extremist growth? For example, the Balkans.
So I'll be very quick. So in terms of the first question is, I think my first advice is to trust their local partners and not depend on intermediate partners who are good in writing, monitoring, and evaluations report, but they are not good in picking the important thing about working with the local communities or making an influence. This is my first advice. For the second, I think there have been a lot of events, conferences that highlight different success stories, and we all from our organization can share. So there's no one fit for all, as we said. It has to be touching the sensitivity of the culture. A lot of factors taken especially when you take a good practice or a success implementation of a project. So we cannot, for me, I cannot limit the answer to this is the best approach. You have to search more.
I think I completely agree. You cannot have a cookie cutter model that fits all. On the contrary, I think what we're seeing is that local organizations understanding their own context, adjusting and adapting and finding unique ground up approaches is important. I think what multinational and international organizations can do is to listen a bit more of the communities themselves, but to understand what their real needs are rather than, I'm working in this area. I know a lot of people want to do really good work, but there's also all these other structural pressures, how to spend that money, we have to do this. It's like really interesting. You have to spend money and you have to do something with it, and that could really impact you don't really think about what works. So looking at sharing the evaluations is absolutely important, and having more balanced relationship with local organizations rather than a hierarchical relationship is really important. I would say that in terms of preventing others, these multinational organizations can talk about and bring people together to learn from each other. I think that's one of the things that is missing. We don't do enough to bring people to come and talk together and learn together and think together. We also stop innovating. When things works in one context, we don't put the new effort to think, well, how can we improve this, make it better? And so there's some other ideas too, but I'll just stop there for the sake of it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.